Podcast number 1. Had issue with the audio. So, on deck today we have Elijah. He's from Alaska. We were just talking about his life in Alaska, growing up in Alaska, what the town of Naknek is like. And now he gets to tell it all over it again. But no, it's phenomenal. It's awesome.
Yep. So I'm Elijah. Spent most of my childhood in Alaska. My family moved up there from Minnesota when I was 3. We drove up in a suburban, 80-something suburban, pulling a trailer, and lived in the town of Cordova for a few years. And then when I was 6, we came back for one summer, and then went back up to the town where I spent the rest of my childhood. So whenever people ask me where I'm from in Alaska, I know there's probably a 99% chance they're going to have no clue what the answer means. But I tell them anyway, town called Naknek, and I usually get a blank stare after that. But there's 2 little towns right next to each other, Naknek and King Salmon, and they're kind of the same, kind of separate. And then beyond that, you have to have a airplane or a boat if you want to go anywhere. You're locked in by tundra and ocean. So it's right at the mouth of a river there. It's a salmon fishing town primarily, and that's where I spent my childhood.
Yeah, and you were just saying that a lot of people think or ask you Anchorage.
Yeah.
And then you go, no, like,
yeah,
it's this little small town.
People know Anchorage and maybe Fairbanks, and beyond that, they have no concept of where it is. So when I get the blank stare, I just tell them it's a little fishing village on the southwest coast down by Kodiak, and then you can at least kind of picture it. It's right where the Aleutian chain connects to the mainland. So if you see a map of Alaska and you see a little string of islands going out into the ocean, it's right where that connects.
As you were talking about, the population is about 800 to 1,000, and then it fluctuates.
Yeah, during the summer, we get seasonal workers from all over the world. Hundreds, if not thousands, of people that come up, and some of them are, annual people that own boats or work on the same boat every year and do the fishing. And then you get I don't want to say unskilled laborers, but physical laborers from all over the world who come to work in the canneries. And you don't have to speak English, so it doesn't really matter where you're from. You just gotta, get a plane ticket to Alaska, and they come pick you up at the airport and drive you to the cannery, and you can just work your tail off all summer. And 3-4 months later, you get a big pile of cash, and you go back home to wherever you came from. So we get people from Southeast Asia and Latin America and all over the United States. College students who are off for the summer and want to earn a lot of money. We met people from Germany and England and just all over the place. You never know who you're going to meet. So,
what is a cannery? Is that how you say it?
Yeah, cannery. It's a place that processes and cans food. In this case, seafood, salmon primarily. So you have the boats that go out with the nets and catch the salmon, and then they take it to you have larger vessels that are kind of like the alien mothership. They go there, they unload their salmon, they gas up, they get all their stuff from this boat rather than, driving all the way into town and getting in line. They go to this larger boat, ship really, and you can offload your catch and refuel and get what you need and head back out and catch more. And so then all that salmon gets brought in, and it's got to be processed before, you can't just take a raw fish and send it around the world. So they take it to a cannery where it gets thrown into an assembly line and sliced up and cut up and processed, and then they put it in a can. And then once they're canned, that stabilizes them, and you can box them up and send them wherever you want to go.
Canned salmon.
Canned salmon, yeah.
Wow, never heard of that.
Yep.
In Minnesota, we got, what is it, spam?
Yeah.
Canned spam.
Well, you get canned salmon all over the place, and some of it'll say farmed, and that probably from Chile or Asia somewhere. They come from all over. You can farm salmon all over the world, but it's not the same. The wild caught stuff is good. So the farmed it puts a dent in the wild salmon industry. But it's not the same stuff. It's cheaper. That's why people get it, obviously, like with anything, people, you want to save money. Salmon is expensive, the good stuff, but,
yeah, it is.
Yeah, I know you go to Sam's Club, they've got it side by side. You can get the farmed or you can get the wild. And,
usually wild, it's a little bit more money.
It's a couple bucks extra, but it's cool to get the wild. I know I used to have to go to Kowalski stores for work. I used to pick up the cash deposits at Kowalski's, and, I went in there one day and they had a sign up advertising think it was Copper River salmon, and I used to live by the Copper River. Whichever river it was one that when I was a little kid, I remember we lived by that. So I thought, here's salmon that's not just from Alaska, but it was actually caught like in the river by where I used to live. It was really cool. And they were advertising that specific river. It was just neat that was for whatever reason, a selling point that I guess that was kind of famous, was salmon from right there in Alaska. So
That's pretty cool.
yeah.
Naknek, we were just talking about how it is such a small town, a small population of up to 1,000 people with fluctuation. We were just talking about how celebrities have gone to this town, and when you were working in the shop.
Yep.
Do you want to tell us about that?
You got Naknek and King Salmon. They're about 15 miles apart, connected by a little bit of paved road, and then that's it. You can't drive anywhere outside of that. And Naknek is right at the mouth of the river where it empties into the ocean, and that's more the commercial fishing town. It's kind of the native population and oriented around that industry. And then King Salmon is largely built around an Air Force base that was there. So they've got a giant airstrip and hangars and a little base that's not really used anymore, but they maintain it. And because of the base, they have an airstrip where you can land pretty much any aircraft you want. And so that became kind of the hub for that part of Alaska. Anybody that's going up there for a fishing trip or a hunting trip or whatever, you take the big plane, you fly into King Salmon, and then from there you can jump on, usually it's a little float plane, and go out to whatever little corner of the tundra where you're taking your fishing trip or hunting trip or what have you. And so as a result, you never know who's going to fly in on the plane on their way on some trip somewhere. They said that at one point Tom Hanks came through town and had a little stopover, and they said he walked across the street to the little tiny grocery store there and bought a soda, I think is what they said. And I heard that John Wayne came through town one time, and the only interesting person that I ever really remember seeing, there was two interesting things. One was it was a Learjet, and that just stuck in my head because at the time I was a kid, I didn't know what that meant, but everybody was telling me that it was a Learjet, and I'm like, okay, so that, whatever that is, right? When you're 10 years old. But they were doing some kind of, as I recall, they were trying to set a record flying around the world or something like that. It was something important, and they were touching down and gassing up and then taking off again in like the middle of the night. And we went down there to see that, and that stuck in my head. That was kind of cool. Just this random people doing something important or significant that flew into our little town real quick, and then away they went. And yeah, beyond that, I didn't really. It just stuck in my head as something kind of cool.
So what was that called?
Learjet. It's a
Learjet.
type of little. I think it's a twin engine little jet.
Okay.
And they were doing something important. I think, as I recall, they were flying around the world. I don't know if they were trying to set some kind of a record or what exactly they were doing. But the one interesting person I got to meet was when I was actually at work there. I worked at the little store in our town. It was kind of a general store. It was mainly a hardware store, but we sold building materials and sporting goods, fishing and hunting stuff. And we had guns behind the counter. And I was in there one afternoon when not much was going on, and this random guy came in. He was a little bit older, heavy set, and he had kind of a funny accent. And he had this little hat on with a feather stuck in it. He's kind of an odd guy. And but he came in and he was looking behind the counter at all the guns and stuff. And so. Being a good clerk, I asked him, "Hey, you want to see anything? What are you looking for?" And he said, "Oh, I was just wondering, do you sell any Trigicon products?" And I said, "No, there's not really." I said, "Well, why? Was there something specific?" And he said, "Oh no, I started the company, so that's why I was curious." And I thought, okay, that's cool. And I wasn't sure whether to believe him. This was before we really had the internet at our fingertips, where you could just fact check anything you wanted instantly. So I didn't know whether to take him at his word. I thought, if that's cool, that's pretty cool. But who is this guy? So I asked him, what in the world are you doing up here? And he said something about having family up there, and he comes to visit from time to time. And I thought, okay. And sometime later, I was flipping through one of my old gun magazines and reading it again. And I came across this article I hadn't paid much attention to before. It was a little question and answer interview. And it was called a Conversation with Trigicon's Glyn Binden. And they had a picture of the guy in Africa on safari with a dead antelope he had just shot. And it was the same guy from the hardware store, and he was wearing the same funny little hat with a little feather stuck in it. And I saw that. I thought, that's the guy. And so, yeah, he just randomly walked into my store one day.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
Yep.
the coolest thing, like one of the cool things about that too, is that he was wearing the same hat, so it was like a
You gotta love it.
like a brand, or like, hey, this is the way. Like people are gonna recognize me with this hat.
A few years later, when I was about 19, I was getting done. I was out in Pittsburgh for gunsmith school, and right before I graduated and left, the NRA National Convention was there. So me and some friends, we went and going through all the booths, meeting all these different people of varying fame, and Trijicon had a booth. So of course I went up there and I told him my little anecdote. I said, hey, I got to meet the owner one time when I was a little kid out in the middle of nowhere, and it was really cool. And the guy said, oh yeah, they said. He died a couple of years ago in a plane crash, they said.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was kind of a bummer. But yeah, apparently not too much longer after I met him. I don't know where he was, but yeah, plane went down, the guy died. So. But yeah, Alaska's a fun place to grow up. Depending on how you're wired. You either love it or hate it. You really have to make your own fun out there. There's not a lot of external things that are ready-made for you to go and do for fun. There's no movie theater to go to. There's no mall to hang out at. There's no McDonald's. There's, you kind of have to make your own fun. So
yeah, well, if you're saying it's landlocked,
right?
So you can't really get anywhere, and I'm assuming it was pretty rural. By standards of like the 80s, 90s.
It's remote. I would imagine that now with the internet, things have gotten, the world has gotten smaller. Everybody's more connected, and something happens, you find out about it immediately. And things were different, growing up in the 90s, where like culture, it took a little while for trends and things to make their way out there. You were a little more isolated than I'm sure things are now, but. Yeah, at the time, you knew everybody in town. You knew who drove what car when you saw it coming at you on the road, and but yeah, you had to make your own fun. If you had buddies that going and having a bonfire down on the beach and driving 4-wheelers everywhere, going camping, you could kind of do whatever you want. So that's the beauty of it, is you had the flexibility and the options to kind of just, unless you did something really bad, you can kind of just do whatever you wanted. I remember one time I was out walking with my friends, and just out of boredom or whatever, I saw some we were walking down I didn't even know whose driveway it was. It was a sandy gravel road that went to somebody's house, and I saw some dry branches, and next thing you knew, I was making a little campfire on this road, and I found out that it was somebody's driveway. Somebody lives at the end of this road, but I was just bored. I started a fire, you can do, like I said, unless you like really damage something, you can kind of just do whatever you want. So if you want to go shooting, just, as long as you're not shooting at someone's house, go shoot wherever you want.
Just find the hills.
Wander out exactly. That's how it was. Wander out in the backyard and go shoot crap if you want,
Wow.
Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of freedom.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I can only imagine, because I grew up in a pretty similar way, where we grew up in a small town, and it was an agriculture town. It hadn't been developed. It was close to the city, but it wasn't like super close. It was pretty, I'm not gonna say remote, but we were on the outskirts of the town. And so because of that, we had a lot of freedom, and you didn't get to see a lot of violence. We didn't really get to see a lot of things growing up for myself. So I'm assuming it was maybe the same way for yourself, or like you just never really heard of anything bad happening. If anybody was causing trouble, being such a small town, everybody knew who it was. Or found out pretty fast. I was like, yeah, we can narrow it down to these people.
Yeah, sometimes. I mean, there's bad people everywhere you go.
Yeah.
A lot of things get swept under rugs,
Mm-hmm.
They don't get dealt with, internally. Of course, a lot of people know rural Alaska has some of the worst, like alcoholism and drug abuse that you see, because it's like I said, there's nothing else to do. You've got all this downtime, especially in the winter when there's less daylight. The days are really short, so if you've got a day job, it's dark when you go to work and it's dark when you get off work, and the rest of the time, if you're prone to that sort of thing, people get into a lot of trouble with once you start drinking, obviously, it causes all kinds of different issues.
Okay.
So that can be pretty common up there, relatively speaking, but it's still a special place. It's still a cool way to grow up.
Yeah, if you want freedom, and then just kind of walk out to your backyard and do whatever.
Yeah, if you want to go camp, you can go camp anywhere you want. If you get in your boat, you can go anywhere in the world. You're on a river on the edge of the ocean. You can just go do whatever you want.
So close to the ocean were you, or how far away?
We were at the mouth of a river where it opens up into the ocean, basically. So yeah, you could get in your 4-wheeler and kind of drive around the corner of the mouth of the river there and look out and see basically the Pacific Ocean out there.
Okay.
So
So were you able to did you used to go to the ocean a lot, or?
not really. We'd go to the beach, but there wasn't much reason for us to generally go out in the ocean. Most people didn't go out there fishing except commercially. You know, if you were fishing for fun, you'd be fishing in the river, freshwater, you know, and salmon and trout and that kind of thing. Obviously, it's a little more dangerous going out into the actual open water. So, yeah, we didn't generally bother with that too much.
Okay.
Now, the commercial fishermen, they go out there all the time. That's where they do their business.
Yeah.
So, but I never did get actually directly involved with the fishing industry. I worked in the store, like I said.
Yeah.
And never got. I didn't like being dirty all the time and muddy. And fishing's a dirty business. You know, you're either on a boat, or a lot of people have what they call subsistence nets, where if you're not a commercial fisherman but you want to be able to get some salmon because there's tons of it up there. You could get a permit to fish a certain stretch of beach. And so you'd have a section of beach and you'd have a sign with your number and your name. And so as you're driving down the beach, there'd be all these little wooden signs up along the bluff there on the edge of the beach. And they'd have somebody's name and whatever little registration number they had. And they would have a spot there where they could tie out, they just called them subsistence nets. And they were anchored high up on the beach at high tide at the high water mark, and then they'd be tethered off to a buoy and an anchor out towards the middle of the river. And these nets are pretty big, you know, a couple 100 feet long. Mm-hmm. And during the fishing, you know, when the fish are running during the summer there, during the fishing season, they have floats on top. And so at high tide, the net would raise up and it would float, and you'd have a weighted line on the bottom and floats on the top. And so it would be suspended and catch a whole bunch of whatever kind of salmon are running. And then when the tide goes out, they'd have to go down there. Every time there's low tide, they'd have to go down and check their nets. And so sometimes you do that in a boat before the water went out, and other times you'd wait for the water to go out and you'd go down a truck or a 4-wheeler or whatever, and you'd unload all these salmon. And sometimes, you know, a lot of fish. So you'd have to haul all these fish home, and then before they spoil, get them all sliced up and diced up and gutted. And then a lot of people would smoke them. A lot of people had smokehouses right in their yards. That was pretty common. And they'd have a shed with a fire pit and racks where you could hang the meat. And they would make basically salmon jerky right in their yards. And it was an easy way of preserving and processing a lot of salmon in a relatively short amount of time. So that was kind of the dynamic in the summer. You know, when you go to hang out with people, you didn't usually cook burgers and stuff because that was expensive. Anything like that had to be brought in from out of town, flown a long ways. Typically what you do is you just have a big old fresh fillet of wild Alaska salmon, and you'd throw it on the fire in a little tin foil or something, and throw some pepper and lemon juice on it and grill it up, and that was what you had.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
crazy. Everything out there has to be flown in, and so things that are heavy are very expensive, like a gallon of milk, you know, that, and also things like milk, not only are they very heavy and bulky, but they have to be kept cold the entire time. So stuff like that is very expensive. Gasoline is brought in on barges. You know, they'd bring in, that was how most goods that didn't need to be brought in regularly right away. Things like milk, you know, you got to get it every few days. But things like gasoline or you know, other durable things that could sit on a ship or a barge for weeks at a time, those were brought in on barges and unloaded. And so, of course, the cost of living is just astronomical out there.
Yeah, that's what I've heard before of, like, even in Anchorage,
Yep.
where like a 12-pack of like Coca-Cola, for example,
Yep.
would be like twice as much as it would be in the States. Or
Yeah. So for us, you've got to get the 12-pack of Coca-Cola all the way up to Anchorage, and then you've got to load it onto a barge and bring it all the way out to our little town and unload it, you know. So yeah, things like that wind up being very expensive. Even just stuff like breakfast cereal, you know, it's the cost of living is really high.
So how were wages compared to, like, did the wages match what the increased cost of living was?
Yeah, they have to, you know, otherwise people wouldn't live out there. So you could, when I was a little kid in the 90s, here, you know, I was a high school student working in a hardware store, and I think I was making I was making about $12 by the time I got done, which back then for a high school student, that was pretty decent. I went from there, and like I said, I went to school out in, gunsmith school out in Pittsburgh. And while I was there for about a year, I worked in the local hardware store because that was what I was used to, just make a little money, keep busy. And their minimum wage at that time in Pittsburgh was, it was just under $6 was minimum wage. And that's what I was making. So, I mean, I enjoyed it. It was a nice place to work, and I was only there for about a year. But yeah, I went from 12, I think it was like $12.50 when I left Alaska, and then I was making like $5.80.
It's like half the money in Pittsburgh.
But I couldn't believe how cheap everything was. I arrived there and I was like, oh my goodness, I can buy there was a 2 liter of soda was like 75 cents or something like that. It was just crazy to me. I'm like, this is like free.
Oh
yeah. So
still remember those days when a 2 liter of Coca-Cola would be like, or Sprite or whatever would be like 99 cents, or sometimes they had specials of 2 for 99 or 2 for $1.10.
Those days are gone.
Yeah, and they're not coming back.
The weird thing about the fishing industry is you have, I don't know what the term is, but incidentally killed fish. They get out of the net or whatever, and they wash up on the beach. And so you have just random dead fish at the high water line, during the summer when the fish are running. Some of them die and don't, for whatever reason, get caught. And so you just kind of have that general fishy smell, like when you drive across a river on the bridge and you catch a whiff of the river and it smells. Well, that's kind of what the fishing town smells like in the summer. I mean, you get used to it. I don't mind this. Well, to me, it smells like growing up. I don't whatever. But and it's not like the whole town smells that way. But when you go down by the beach, when you get near the water, it smells like a river. And so I remember one time I was with my friends driving down there during the summer on the four-wheelers, and there where the high water line was all the, sticks and rubbish and things that the waves leave at high tide. And, every little ways you drive along, there'll just be a random dead salmon laying there. And of course the bears love that. They come along and scarf all that up, and the seagulls love that. So you have, scavengers that are eating this stuff. But I remember this one bloated salmon laying there. We thought it would be really cool to drive over it with a four-wheeler and try to predict which end the innards would come out of, Like I said, you have to make your own fun in Alaska. You don't have places to go and things to do. You got to amuse yourself. And so that was the kind of stuff we did.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but you'd see cool things. I know in the winter, of course, you get ice that builds up on the beaches, 6 feet thick. And then in the spring, as the water starts to warm up, first the ice out in the river breaks loose and goes out to the ocean, and then you still have the ice on the shore, and that gradually gets washed away by the tides bit by bit, and so the lower part of the beach will be clear of ice and down to the gravel, but the upper part where the water doesn't reach as much will still have ice on it. And so in the spring, you can go down to the beach and find things that washed up in the ice in the winter. I remember one spring, I went down there and I found the remains of a beluga whale just laying on the beach. There was like a spine and a few ribs, and you could tell, it had been a carcass. There was a little bit of soft tissue attached to it, and that was the only thing it could be really was the belugas are pretty common up there. But yeah, here's just, the remains of a whale laying there waiting to be eaten up by the scavengers. And another time we were riding our four-wheelers and there was the flattened remains of a bald eagle that had died of who knows what. They got to die eventually, and you could tell from the beak and the claws that it had been a bald eagle, and it was just a bunch of matted feathers still stuck to what was left of the carcass, the skeleton and everything.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So just random stuff like that, you never know what you're going to find down there.
Did you ever find any animals that were complete frozen? Like they maybe died and then they were...
I don't remember ever finding that. I think the coolest thing I ever found was my last year up there when I graduated high school. My grandma and grandpa came up from Minnesota here for my graduation and just to visit, And I took a day trip with my grandpa. He loves to hike and explore. So anyway, one of the things we did, we stopped off. We were in a little rowboat and we stopped off at one of the canneries up there to go explore. It was mostly abandoned. A lot of old fishing shacks and old buildings and machinery, and everything just gets left there. There's nowhere to recycle things. A lot of things just get left. And so we were poking around, looking around, and we were getting ready to climb back in the boat and keep heading along the river there to home. And I realized I haven't found any cool souvenirs from this outing. Every time I go out and do something, I like to try and find something interesting for, just as a little memento. And as soon as I thought that, I looked around on the beach and I saw looked like a bone sticking out of the sand. And I thought, what's that? And I grabbed it, and it was a great big heavy bone. And I thought, oh, that's kind of cool. I don't know what it's from, but okay, that'll do. I threw it in the boat, took it home with me, and I never gave much thought to it. I figured it's from something big, a moose, a bear. I don't know what it's from. Like I said, this was before the internet was really common where you could just sit down and look up anything you wanted. Well, I had it for years and years, and finally a few years ago, I thought, you know what? I should actually look up and find out for sure what that's from. So I started Googling pictures of skeletons of grizzly bear. Was way too small, and a moose, way too small. I thought, well, okay, what about ocean-going stuff? Whales, walruses, things like that. Nothing matched. Everything was too small, or the wrong shape, or both. So finally, I thought, well, there's a lot of mastodon skeletons up there, carcasses frozen in the permafrost, and from time to time they get exposed and discovered. And so I brought up an image of a full mastodon skeleton, and I thought, okay, well the shape is kind of close, but these are too big. What I have is smaller. It's about 16 inches long, and so I thought, well, what about maybe a young one? So I was able to Google up a picture of a juvenile woolly mammoth complete skeleton reassembled, and there it was. That was my bone. It was from a young woolly mammoth. No question about it. It's one of the leg bones from a young woolly mammoth, and so there it was, just sticking out. It looks kind of like half fossilized. It's got kind of that mineral kind of where it almost looks like stone look, but it's pretty cool. I've got it sitting in my bedroom right now, and I was told shortly after I left, in the next year or two there, they said they found a complete woolly mammoth down near the beach. I don't know how it was discovered, some kind of excavation project or something, and they found, it sounded like a pretty intact one, frozen into the permafrost out there. It's pretty cool.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Those animals, yeah, definitely. I mean, you're looking at the weather up there, and, they probably belonged in that, or they must have belonged in that area. Yeah, it's just very interesting that you had those big animals, and don't have them anymore.
It was crazy to imagine. I mean, you get used to seeing, you see bears, and that's pretty crazy, and you see caribou and moose, but to imagine, the wide open tundra, and then just picturing like a big hairy elephant wandering through it it was so bizarre. It was like living in Minnesota and remembering that there used to be enormous buffalo everywhere, and how crazy that would be to just suddenly see one of those wild, thousands of pounds. But to think, that mammoths used to just wander around there.
And the way you're describing the bone compared to the other species like bears, grizzlies and whatnot, it's like, man, it must have been a big animal. If you got to see one. Yeah. Man, that's impressive. Crazy. So talking of animals, how was hunting up there? Like, were you a hunter up there? Did you get the chance to?
Yeah, that was where a lot of the subsistence meat came from. Like I said, if you wanted beef, that had to be shipped a long ways, and kept cold. So beef was pretty expensive. A burger or a steak or whatever you wanted, even chicken, it all had to be flown in. And so any meat that you could source there, salmon were a dime a dozen. People with subsistence nets would, you fill your freezer and you jar some, you put it in that, you smoke some, and eventually it's, hey, does anybody need, people that don't have nets, do you need some salmon? Here you go. Take whatever you want, whatever you have room for. Here you go. And so you could get lots of salmon pretty easily. But then beyond that, if you wanted something other than beef for cheap, you can go shoot caribou, and moose to a lesser extent. A lot more meat on a moose, but they were a little harder to get. Caribou, they live out in the open and they live in giant herds, and so when there's a herd in the area, they're pretty easy to shoot, and they're not very tenacious animals either. They're relatively easy to kill. Part of that probably being that, if you shoot a deer and it runs 100 yards, you might never find it. But a caribou, you could watch it for a half a mile and see it fall, because it's wide open tundra. So people get pretty sloppy up there, the locals especially. Alaska natives are kind of famous for using small caliber guns, ironically. 22 Hornet, 223, probably the most common caliber I remember. Oh, for just about everything. Yeah. Like the Eskimos are famous for that. Using small guns for most of what they do. so it seemed like in Alaskan hunting, the guns fell into kind of two camps, at least for the locals. You know, a tourist coming up is going to bring a tourist gun, you know, whatever he wants. Oh, Alaska, I'm going to go buy something huge, you know, which is fine. If you're going to hunt bears, or that's fine. Yeah. But the locals who are just going out and getting meat for their freezer and they're shooting multiple caribou a year, yeah. Hey. They've kind of inherited that small caliber mindset. And so it seemed like just as I got older and I started talking to more people, more hunters and getting exposed to that, it seemed like the most common caliber for caribou up there, most popular was 243 was really popular.
Okay.
22 250 was pretty common. And so it seemed like people's mindset kind of went into two camps. They had a big gun for bears, or whether it be moose or whether it be like defense or hunting. Not too many locals really bothered with bear hunting. That was more of kind of a tourist thing. But you had a big gun for hunting moose or for bears if you needed it. And then for everything else, you had a smaller gun. That's smaller than most people would expect. You know, like I said, 243, 22 250, 220 Swift, 223. All of those were really, really popular up there. And, people would go out and they'd hunt wolves. You know, they had a lot of wolves up there. You could go out and shoot wolves. So for that, of course, you don't need a huge gun. And caribou and hey, buddy. And so my mindset didn't really go there. I've always had weird taste in guns, but first big game I ever killed was a caribou. I only ever killed one. But I borrowed my dad's 270, which is probably about the perfect caliber for caribou, really. If you were to pick one, they're bigger than a deer, but like I said, they're not particularly hard to kill. And generally, when you shoot them, you're in just wide open tundra with nowhere to hide. So I mean, you can watch the thing. You know, if you were to place your shot poorly and it ran a little ways and then fell over, like, oh well, just drive the 4-wheeler over there and get it. Mm-hmm. So I got a caribou when I was about 16, 17, thereabouts. And then I went out moose hunting 3 different times. And it seemed like every time we went out, some sort of calamity would strike. The first time moose hunting, we sank our boat. And I know, right? We got it back. We fixed it. It's okay, but we sank it. Oh, technically, it sank while I was asleep. It was overnight. Long story, right? So we spent our big day that we would have been out looking for moose. We spent it bailing out the boat and trying to get it floating again and getting the engine fixed and all of that. Yeah. So the first time that happened. Second time I went moose hunting was on 9/11. The 9/11. Like I said, you're kind of isolated from everything in the rest of the world. Like we knew what happened. You wake up and it was early in the morning. Alaska's earlier, way earlier than New York. So it was morning in New York. It was really early in Alaska. So I woke up and came out of bed and the TV was already on. And my parents told me, there was all this thing. So you watch TV and it's like, well, okay, it's thousands of miles away. Like obviously it's big news, but there's nothing I can do from here. You're just watching it on TV and like anybody else really. But for us, we were even more removed where, the only effect it really had was that, direct effect immediately was that when all the planes got grounded, it was hunting season. Like I said, I was planning to go moose hunting that day. And so you had people that were out in hunting camps remotely who had been dropped off by float planes. The plane would take them out wherever they were going to go, drop them in their gear and be like, all right, we'll be back in 3 days or whatever. And so these people are out in the boonies with all their gear and possibly even a dead moose, and their plane didn't show up. So the day rolls around and they're sitting there like, here we are out in the middle of the wilderness. We were supposed to have a plane. There's no plane. Yes. But we thought, well, we were planning on going hunting. We might as well go hunting. So we loaded up our stuff and went, and it was kind of ironic. The rest of the world was in chaos, and here we are out in the middle of nowhere. The sun's shining, the birds are singing. It's just me and my buddy drifting down a creek in a boat. We took a boat and went up a stream somewhere and went and hunted and came back and drifting back down the stream. I remember it stuck in my head. I was fishing with my buddy who was older. He was an adult. I was in my teens, and we were in his dad's Lund boat. And as we're drifting back down the creek toward the main river there to go home, he had brought a sack. It stuck in my head. I'm not sure why. He had brought a bag of pepper jerky, and we were drifting down the creek on this beautiful warm day, chewing on jerky, just enjoying the sunshine. And I remember over next to us on the bank, we saw a little mink scampering along, which you don't see those wild very often. And we saw a random little mink, and he saw us, and then he ran off. And that just stuck in my head as this little picture of here we are on 9/11, and it was a good day for us.
Jerky
Yeah, but we didn't get a moose, but it was a good day. It's probably a good thing we didn't get a moose because we didn't have a four-wheeler with us. And if you don't have an ATV to transport the meat, it's a lot of work. You go out and shoot a thousand, it's like shooting a horse out in the middle of the wilderness. And now you've got to transport the things. So typically you would either have, people that have planes would take a plane and go hunt, or, you'd have take a four-wheeler in your boat, that kind of a thing, unload it when you get there and use the four-wheeler to transport it. So having to manually transport and cut up and transport an entire moose in bear country, it can be hairy.
That's what I was just thinking. You probably have to cut it up and take it out in pieces.
So you start to cut it up and process it, and you carry one load back to the boat, and sometimes people will, they'll leave their rifles at the boat because they're carrying as much meat as they can. And they'll just have, like one guy will have a 44 Magnum or something. But while you're gone, if a bear comes along and is like, hey, a big dead animal carcass, sweet, it's mine now. I'm going to claim it. I'm going to eat a little bit. I'm going to save the rest for later. And next thing you know, he turns around and here's, Hunter Bob walking back for another load, and you got to be careful. So that can be sketchy. And then, hopefully you get it all done in one day. I mean, the sun, it stays light pretty late then, but something you got to be aware of when you're out hunting is.
How would be so in the summer, does it get pretty hot?
It's more mild. Yeah.
More mild.
I didn't pay attention to the specific temps, but like a warm day would be in the 70s, and
okay.
A lot of the time in Alaska is it's jacket weather. You go outside, it's cold in the mornings, and in the day it gets up in the 50s or 60s, depending on the time of year. But there's just a lot of that kind of weather where you wear a jacket when you go out and do things. Obviously in the winter it can get bitter cold, and in the summer it can get warm, but it's a lot more mild. And we were right on the coast, so the ocean makes it a lot more temperate. It doesn't get
moderates
as hot.
Temperature.
Yeah, there's a lot of wind coming off the ocean, a lot of breeze, and without any real substantial trees on the coastal tundra like that, there's nothing really to stop the wind. So like in the winter, the snow will blow into really big drifts, and
yeah, I'm asking that because of if it gets too hot, you got a dead animal there.
Oh, yeah. No, by the time that was in hunting season was in September. So by the time you get to September, it's warm enough that there's still bugs. The bugs haven't all been killed. Alaska has just horrific bugs on the coast, at least, and so that's one of the more brutal things about living out there is putting up with the stupid bugs every summer. All the gnats and mosquitoes and all of those. Yeah.
Man. So. You said there's a hunting season, so it's obvious. Does that mean that you can't just shoot a moose anytime throughout the year? You have a specific.
Yep, you got a hunting season for moose and for caribou. The hunting rules are fairly generous for subsistence hunting for locals. I think when you get your hunting license, it had 5 stamps or tags for caribou right on it. So the limits are pretty generous. And caribou are herd animals, so a lot of times when you see isolated ones sometimes, but generally speaking, they're, migratory was the term I was looking for. These giant herds will travel around, the tundra. And so a lot of times when you do find them, there's a giant group of them out in the middle of the tundra, and they're pretty obvious. The one time that I went out, when I was old enough to care about hunting, they actually didn't allow caribou hunting in our immediate area. You had to travel a little ways and hunt in other zones. But I remember one year when I was about 16, there was a different herd that had migrated into our area and so they opened up a special resident only subsistence hunt for, I don't know, it was a week or something like that. And they were like, all right, any residents, boom, this is your chance. Go out, shoot. I forget what the limit was. But it was kind of a free-for-all because, like I said, normally you couldn't hunt right in our area. And so it was a weekday, but whoever was free, it was, the people were going out and hunting. And I wanted to go out on this particular day, and I had never gotten a big game animal before, and my parents didn't want to let me go. I said, come on, everybody's going out. I'm going to go out and shoot a caribou. And they said, well, we'll see if you can find somebody to go with, call around, find out somebody who's going out. And so I called my buddy and got his mom. She said, oh, they already went. Him and his dad, they're already out there on the 4-wheelers. And I'm like, well, where did they go? And she told me the area. And all right, I called 1 or 2 other people that we knew, and either they weren't able to go out that day or they already gone. So finally I convinced my parents to let me take the 4-wheeler and the rifle and head out. And they said, all right, well, go out in this spot where it sounds like everybody else is going this general area. And if you find somebody that you know, stick with them, you know, tag up. Don't just be wandering around by yourself if you can help it. I said, all right, fine. So I got the rifle, got all my stuff. I didn't know what I was doing. and I drove out this one area, and eventually I came upon a guy who he had one or two dogs with him, oddly enough, and his four-wheeler. And he had one or two caribou dead laying on the ground that he had just shot. And I stopped to talk to him, and he was getting ready to field dress them, you know, getting his stuff out, his knife and everything. And he said, oh, yeah, well, the herd's right over the top of this hill here if you want to go shoot one. I said, oh, all right. He's like, yeah, just go that way. You'll see them. So I drove up over, and sure enough, off in the distance, there was the big herd of caribou. So I started trying to get myself close enough to take a shot, you know. And at the time, I didn't really understand, like, what kind of range I had with a rifle. Like, I knew how to shoot, but I hadn't done anything with a rifle really, where I understood, like, how much does my bullet drop at a given distance? How far is that? 200 yards? I don't know. You know, it's just out there. You put the scope on it and you shoot, you know, and I was just kind of guessing, like, well, how far can I hit an animal? I didn't know. I really didn't know what I was doing. But there's a lot of that in Alaska. There's a lot of hacks and a lot of people that are pretty sloppy in their hunting, and so I was in good company in that regard. But anyway, eventually I got close enough, and I was kind of moving parallel to this little group of caribou that were off by themselves, about 5 or 6 animals, and as I was riding along on the four-wheeler and they were trotting along on the tundra, I realized we were starting to get a little bit closer. And finally I thought, you know what? If one of them stops, I think I'd be in range. I'm going to take a shot if one of them stops. I don't want to do it while they're walking, but if one of them holds still for a second, I'm going to take a shot. And sure enough, the last one in the group, he paused for a second. He came to a stop. I don't know if he was going to nibble something on the ground or what, but I jumped off the four-wheeler and rested my shot and shot him and got my caribou. So
Nice.
yeah. I didn't know what like I said, I didn't know what I was doing, so I skinned it out on the spot.
You skinned it.
Yeah, I didn't know how people normally do this. I had never shot a big game animal. All I had ever killed were birds and fish and stuff like that, and a rabbit one time. And so I just assumed, you got an animal and it's dead. And I had seen a video about how to field dress game one time, and the guy was hunting somewhere hot, and he had shot a bear, so you skin it right away to cool down the meat. So I was just like, I don't know, you skin it when you shoot it, you know. So I had this caribou laying on the ground here. You know, caribou's a big animal, you know, and I'm a skinny teenage kid with a four-wheeler out in the middle of nowhere in Alaska, and so I had planned. That's the other thing is I got to get this thing loaded onto a four-wheeler by myself. And that's a pretty good size animal, you know. It's somewhere between like a whitetail and an elk, you know, as caribou. And so my plan had been, you know, cut off the head and cut off the legs like at the knee and just the part that we're going to keep, you know, and just leave the rest out there. They didn't have antlers at that time of year anyway, so the antlers were not. It was a male, but it didn't have antlers. It was the wrong time of year. It was like spring, I think. Like I said, it was a special hunt, and so I had brought along a saw, a little T-handle like hunting saw that I was going to use for cutting off the legs at the knees. Well, that had fallen out of my belt at some point while I was walking during the day. So I got out there and I realized I don't have my saw. All I have is the knife. And so I cut off the head and I skinned it. And now I've got this skinned caribou. And in order to get it, it wasn't enough for me to just be able to lift it right off the ground. It was too much weight for me, because it was a big, awkward, floppy, gutted out animal, you know? And so what I finally had to do was for one of the things I had brought with me for supplies was my roll of, I didn't have proper rope, I guess. So I had brought my roll of decoy line from duck hunting. It was like twine, you know, real strong, like braided twine. Well, I had a bunch of it extra. And so I thought, well, I'll just take that just to have, you know, it's useful. So what I did was I flipped the legs up of the caribou and I lashed them to the rear rack of the four-wheeler. We had an old Honda Foreman 400. And so I had one side of the caribou anchored to the rack. And then that held it steady to where I was able to get underneath it and flip it up and flop it over the part that was tied down and get it on the rear rack. And then I lashed the poor animal onto my four-wheeler using decoy line from duck hunting. It's this thin braided nylon cord, and I zigzagged and went all over, and I got him strapped out. So this thing is jiggling and sliding and everything. Oh. Yeah, I got her home. My parents, they took a home video of me coming up the driveway with this big red, freshly shot headless caribou carcass on the back. I have a picture of it. Yeah.
Oh, did you got it? Got it?
Yeah, I got it on the spot.
You got it on the spot.
Didn't know it. Like I said, this was all new to me. So here I am with this big giant creature, and I'm in there. You know, I'm used to doing little birds and fish and things, and now I've suddenly got this animal that's bigger than I am. And
I was gonna say, hopefully you didn't just skin it and then not got it. I was like,
no. But I remember thinking when I got done with that, my first time having no idea, I didn't have any YouTube to teach me how or anything else. I was just winging it, and I got all done, and I thought, oh my god, I cannot imagine if I had shot 2 of these, because I would have, but legally I could have shot 2 if I wanted, or 3, you know, however many you want. I don't know what the limit was. I think most hunting seasons it's 5, so the limit may have been 5, but I was so glad I'd only shot 1.
Wow.
Yeah.
So obviously you guys processed it, and then I'm assuming you kept the meat and you you froze it, and then
that's what we eat up there is caribou. So it's pretty lean. We brought it home and we hung it in a shed in our yard and let it hang for a couple days. And then that Saturday while I was at work, without even telling me, my parents did all the butchering. They had it all cut up and processed and everything. By the time I got home, I thought, oh, that was easy. I didn't have to do the hardest part. So
wait, do your parents hunt?
My dad did when I was younger. By the time I got old enough to start big game hunting, he had kind of gotten out of it. And so he'd gone out a couple times when he was a little younger, when I was smaller. He had gone out with a friend a few times and shot a few caribou, you know, and that's what you live off, you know, for the winter. You fill the freezer up.
So what were some, how do you eat it? What are some typical recipes up there? Because I'm assuming you don't have a lot of spices. You don't have a lot. It's got to be a lot of.
You can get whatever you want for. I mean, we had a grocery store, so.
Oh.
Yeah, you can do whatever recipes you want in that regard. Our town was actually, it was relatively nice for a fishing village. There were a lot of villages that were more primitive and more remote and didn't have some of the stuff that we had. Like our town had an indoor swimming pool that they had built. And so, like, you know, there's a lot of stuff like that, and like a real post office, you know, that they made that when I was a kid. I remember when we moved to that town, I think the first post office was in a little like double wide trailer or something that they converted into a post office. And then at some point there in the 90s when I was little, they built from scratch a brand new, like, relatively modern post office. And so we had stuff like that. We had a Napa store in our town. That was like one of the few like name brand stores, you know, they had a Napa. And so there was stuff like that a lot of the little villages didn't have. So yeah, anyway, back to the grocery store. We had a more or less real grocery store. It was small and it cost a lot of money, but you could get pretty much whatever you needed, you know, normal things. And so for caribou, I mean, yeah, you could cook it however you wanted. You could do steaks and stuff. I remember my mom making, you know, caribou stroganoff and things like that. I was a little kid. I didn't get too excited about caribou, but whatever, you know, whatever mom made, that was it. You'll eat it and like it.
Yeah. You don't really have an option like
this. Right. I got more of a taste for seafood. I really liked the, you know, salmon. And then as I got older, I'd go fishing. I'd catch trout. Mm-hmm. A lot of rainbows up there, really big rainbow trout up there. And so to this day, you know, when I forgot how good rainbows were. And the last time I had something that tasted like that, a friend gave me a fish. I don't remember if it was a rainbow or just something that tasted it was very similar to rainbow trout. And it took me back. I thought, oh, I forgot how good they were. When I was a kid, man, I'd cook it up myself. I'd fry it up and man, good stuff.
There's a hot sauce that I bought from Alaska, and I have it in my kitchen. It's called Athawaska.
Okay.
And to me, it was just interesting that they grow those peppers up there, and then I think they mix it with salmon or salmon oil or something like that.
Weird.
Yeah, it's actually really good.
Strange.
You put it on your eggs, and you're just like, oh my god, this is awesome. But so caribou hunting, you said bear hunting is more of a tourist attraction more than for the locals.
Yeah, what I had always heard was that you don't really want to eat the bears that are around town because depending on the time of year, they'll supplement whatever natural diet they can get with just going and eating all the garbage at the dump. You know, there's one big landfill for the town. And so and the entire town's food waste winds up in one place. And so the bears come around just like, raccoons getting in your garbage here, and they can just scavenge around and find all kinds of just food right there, stuff to eat. And so it was pretty common when you go to the dump, especially if it was in the evening, to just see brown bears wandering around eating stuff. And so the locals didn't usually bother shooting bears. It was more often just when you had a problem bear for whatever reason, where they it's trying to, one gets too curious and tries to break into your house or whatever, and once in a while that kind of thing would happen and somebody would have to shoot a bear. But other than that, I always heard you didn't really want to eat the ones that were around us. And so it was more of just kind of a trophy hunting type thing, where people would come and do it just to do it, and have the fur and everything else. And in the more remote areas, maybe you could eat them. Maybe they did. But around where we were, they ate too much garbage and stuff like that, and you didn't really want to bother with hunting them.
Oh, so that was the reason for it. It was more that it was eating the garbage.
Yeah, it was not something you generally would do for meat. If you were a local and you wanted meat, you'd go shoot a caribou or you'd shoot a moose.
Yeah.
And I mean, the bears were there were a lot of bears around depending on the time of year, but not something you'd usually bother with, hunting just for the sake of hunting.
I thought you were saying that the locals liked it because they
no.
cleaned up the trash. That's the way I was thinking at first. But now it makes sense.
That was why you didn't generally bother shooting a brown bear for food. Where we were is you want to eat an herbivore. But the bears, during the fishing season when the salmon are running, like I said, a lot of the salmon that died and for whatever reason didn't get stuck in the net or whatever, a lot of that would wash up on the shore, and so the salmon or the bears would go up and down the beach, and there's plenty of nice smelly salmon all along the beach. They could come along and eat that and fatten up for winter. That's their goal, is to get fat for winter. And then later in the summer, when the salmon have kind of stopped running and that source of food has started to dry up, they would start going through town every evening, especially. And they'd learn where all the dumpsters were, and they'd travel through town and they'd flip the dumpster over and dig around, and they'd find a bag that obviously had some food in it, and they'd carry it off into the brush and eat it, or they'd sit right there and find what they could to eat. And then they'd wander through town to the next dumpster and dig garbage out of that. And so they'd make a mess. And so I remember the one place we lived had a dumpster outside about 50 yards from the house, and for a while there, you could just about set your watch the same time every night. You'd hear that metal dumpster clang, and you'd look outside, and there'd be a shadowy bear, a couple bears over there, and sometimes they'd tip the whole dumpster over. Other times they would just pull the bags out of it, and it got interesting. You had to be careful, but a lot of people up there have dogs. That's one of the reasons they have them, is a dog lets you know if there's a bear around. And so you'd hear the neighbor, down the road, and his dog would start going crazy and barking. Well, if it's dusk time, then like, okay, it's probably a bear. Maybe if the kids are playing outside, tell them, hey, come inside. The neighbor's dog's barking. I don't getting kind of sketchy. So,
yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yep.
You don't want kids around a brown bear. It doesn't matter how curious they might be, or
I mean, you run into them. There were times where you turn around and, oh crap, there's a gigantic carnivore right there. He just doesn't happen to want to eat me. It's just weird.
What do you do in those cases? Because my understanding is just kind of stand still, or was it that with brown bears?
Yeah, well, if they're around town, they're used to people. They're just looking for garbage, wandering through, kind of a thing. So they're generally not going to bother you unless somehow you manage to scare one or something, which doesn't really happen. But sometimes you'd see one wandering through town, and so you just go inside. Hey, I just saw a bear outside. Watch out! Don't go outside right away. But it would get a little freaky. I remember one morning we were cleaning up after the bears had tipped over the dumpster and ripped open the bags, made a big mess. So my parents and I went outside to clean it up. We had a couple rakes to, scoop the garbage back into the dumpster. And as we're doing that, my dad said, well, I'm going to go get us another rake. So he started to walk over to next door to grab a rake. And about that time, my mom and I looked over, and a bear was coming back to get some more garbage, I guess, coming back there in the morning. So we thought, oh my goodness, get in the house. So we scooted over to the house. And we thought, oh, Dad's still out there. And so we looked, and sure enough, he started walking back, and he got to there was a little stairs going down to where the dumpster was. He got up to the top and looked right down, and there's a bear 20 feet away just chewing through the garbage looking for stuff. So
Oh,
he was fine. I mean, they leave people alone. It's very rare for them to have any reason to want to mess with a person, but they still freak you out a little bit, you know.
yeah. Yeah. Well, big animal.
Yeah, I mean,
what are they, like over 1,000 pounds?
they can be. I mean, an average brown bear is like a big black bear, you know, and obviously brown bears have the potential to get really huge, but
Yeah.
you know, they're just
That's crazy.
looking for something to eat. They don't. Yeah.
Do you know that bears and dogs are related?
Okay.
It was like random science article that popped up once, and I was like, oh no, it was. I was just very curious about how bears came to be and how dogs
Okay.
came to be, and just kind of following the lineage, I found that millions of years ago they had a species in common. I forgot what the name of the species was. It was basically like the previous version of the dog,
Yeah.
and the bear, and then they went their own path. So dogs went a certain path, and other, I don't know what, I can't remember which other species went with dogs and evolving. They're not dogs, but wolves and all that. And on the other side, you had bears, which like took their own path. So you had all these other animals that took like the same path, and then they kind of branched out. You got kind of like a tree branch, and then now you got dogs, and you got certain other creatures. But bears were just one straight line, like their own way, if I remember right. Yeah, it was very interesting. So now we're saying people eating bear. Ever since knowing that, when I hear people like hunting bear or eating bear, I'm just thinking like, oh, it's kind of like eating dog in my. It's just the way I see it in my mind.
Right,
even though
right.
maybe it's not. Who knows?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. Outdoor activities up there, you generally take a gun along. It's pretty common, you know. Even as simple as when I was little, we had a dog that was no bigger than these ones, maybe probably even a little smaller. He was a skittish, yippy little thing, nervous dog. And when we'd let him outside to do his business in the yard there as a kid, if it was winter, you know, it'd be dark much of the time. And so I remember I'd had my flashlight, and I'd take my 12 gauge shotgun and my mag light, and I'd go stand in the doorway. Here it is, the middle of winter in Alaska. It's cold, and I'm standing in the door, and I'm shining the light out in the yard, trying to watch my dog to make sure he doesn't get eaten by anything. And he's this little tiny dog, so he's like walking in the tire tracks in the snow, you know, where the car drove, so he doesn't have to walk through the deep powder, and he's sniffing around trying to find the perfect place to take a leak. I'm yelling at him, get back in the house, just go. And I'm standing, the steam is pouring in the door, and I'm shining. I've got the shotgun in case a random bear shows up or something. I mean, that's the kind of thing that's pretty common, pretty normal way of life up there, you know. It's just, I remember in our gun cabinet, we had a big wooden cabinet with glass doors and half a dozen guns in there. And my dad, I remember him telling us that the one on the far right, the shotgun there, that one's loaded. So just, you know, the rest of them are empty, but that one's for bears, you know, so just don't mess with it, you know.
So what is an age where like people tend to kind of get into firearms up there because of the way of living with bears and all of that? Like what kind of a common?
Well, like things are pretty fast and loose in that regard. You know, there isn't. I don't know. I remember shooting when I was 4 or 5 years old. My dad bringing me over and helping me hold a .22 pistol, and I remember first pistol I ever shot was a Ruger .22 with the inner bolt, and I didn't understand the concept of the bolt coming back, and so I remember it gave me a blood blister. I had my hand wrapped right behind it, and my dad's like, all right, just look down the top here, and I shot, and the thing pinched me and gave me a blister right there. It's burned in my memory as the first time I ever fired a handgun. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty casual up there. It's pretty recreational. It's something, you know. I remember being down at the beach having a fire with friends and their family, and just goofing around with my buddies, and my dad had his 357 along, and I remember him setting something up for my mom to take a few shots at, you know, just goofing around, that kind of thing. It's pretty common when you go out and you're just relaxing, having fun or whatever, to just bust out a gun and shoot a little bit because there's not much else to do, you know, just have a little fun, do a little plinking. So
You just find a safe spot and start. Yeah, no, that's awesome that you're able to do that at such a young age, and it's just part of the culture and people understand it, and
Yep.
it's just like, yeah, it's a tool.
Yeah. Yeah, where I lived, like our backyard was just like hundreds of miles of open tundra, basically. So anytime I wanted, pretty much, you could, just take the 22 and go wander out on the tundra, and if you found anything that was in season, you could shoot it, And so that was kind of what I did for fun. And young people, it seemed like they either loved Alaska or they hated it. Mm-hmm. If you like the outdoors and kind of that being independent, living off the land, being able to do whatever you want, then you can have a great time. And that's what I did. But there were other people that they couldn't wait to graduate high school and get out of there and go live anywhere else and be somewhere where you could, have civilization. And like, I don't want to go shoot anything. I just want to, I want to be able to go get Starbucks, that kind of thing. So
yeah.
You had a lot of people, as soon as they graduated, they're like, I'm out of here. I'm going to go to college in a city somewhere. I'm going to go live that life. Exactly. And me, I'm kind of like, well, it'd be kind of nice to be back there. I kind of miss it, the freedom and being able to do whatever you want, not having a lot of people around. To this day, I hate cities. I go down to cities, and everywhere I look, everything is man-made, and I'm just like, how do people live like this?
It's crazy. Like I don't understand how more people are not into or find out about like the not being in a city, like going out in
right.
nature, right? And
right.
I wonder if people just don't ever go out of the city, and I know people who love the city, and they also love going out camping. It's like they reset themselves like that. It's like, okay, that's pretty cool. Like, that's the way you want to live. Like that.
That's kind of how I view the whole like overlanding thing. It's like for city people who want to go and not be city people for a little while.
Yeah.
You're like, yay, we're roughing it. Woo, I drove through mud today and it was amazing, And I was like, okay, whatever,
Yeah.
To each their own, but
it's just but all in all, I'm a huge believer that we are meant to be in nature. Mm-hmm. Like we're just connected to it. Even though we build things, mankind has been building things for the longest time. It's still like it's breathtaking when you see, like, you just showed us that picture of Northern Lights just recently, and you get to experience things like that. The first time I got to see the stars, the Milky Way, I think it was, and it was last year. I was out about 3 or 4 hours away from the cities, and even where I grew up, as a child, I just never paid attention to any of those things. Just kind of grew up just being entertaining yourself and whatever. But I looked up. It was a clear skies that day, and I look up and I look at the Milky Way, and I had never seen that many stars ever.
Yep.
And the person that I was with is telling me like, oh, if you want to walk up to the bridge, I guess there's a little bridge there somewhere. Like you can really you can see everything. And I didn't get the chance to. It was cold. We were hunting that day. It was the end of, basically, what do you call it? It was dark already. And I was like, like maybe tomorrow, I'm cold. It's just been a brutal day. We didn't catch anything. So it's just like, I'm ready to have some supper or something. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But no, it's amazing when you get to see things like that.
Oh, yeah. It's ironic. People always associate Alaska with the Northern Lights, but I only really remember one time as a kid where I saw it and it was like really impressive, really vivid. I remember I was at my buddy's house, and I don't know if his dad yelled at us to come check it out or what, but I remember walking out of his front door and standing on his porch for a minute, looking up at the sky like, wow, that's really cool. And then after a few minutes, we're like, all right, let's go back inside and play N64 some more or whatever. But I only remember one time where it was really like impressive like that. Not just a little bit of hazy, like, oh yeah, it's the Northern Lights up there, but like, wow, the colors and everything. But the most impressive, it's ironic. The best display of the Northern Lights I ever remember was in Roseville, Minnesota. One evening, I was out driving somewhere with my brother, and we pulled over right on the side of the road, right in the middle of a suburb of all places in Minnesota. And it was so crazy that one night, I don't know what it was, but I remember we pulled over and just stopped to soak it all in, and it was that was the one that stuck in my head. Is like, wow.
In Roseville.
Roseville, of all places.
Of all-
It's the crazy. After growing up in Alaska year after year, I go to Roseville and I see the Northern Lights. So.
I haven't gotten to see them yet, but Mille Lacs
Okay.
Lake.
Yep.
Yeah, people say that they get to see them up there. Just haven't had the chance to.
Yeah.
And I don't know if are they more common in the summer or in the winter?
I don't know. I never paid too much attention to them. The few times that I've seen them, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time, and all of a sudden, just wow, there they are. I happened to be outdoors when it happened. You
Yeah.
know? Yeah.
So you had moose hunting right
Yep.
up there. You had caribou,
Yep.
which are different animals, moose and caribou.
Yeah, they're both in the deer family, but
Mhm.
moose are the biggest member, and then caribou are, like I said, they're on average between like whitetail and elk. They're kind of
Okay.
like an average caribou is probably the size of like a really big-bodied whitetail. You know,
Okay.
if you kind of think of it that way.
And then you had grizzly bears, brown
Yep.
bears.
Yep.
And so what else was there to hunt? The small game you said?
Yeah, there's
Rabbits,
we had snowshoe hares.
snowshoe hares.
Yeah.
What's
It's
that?
just like a subspecies of rabbit, basically.
Oh,
you know,
okay.
they're related but different. Like down here, you have cottontails. You know, that's real common. Or a snowshoe hare is just a different species of the same thing. So we had those. The only one of those I ever got, I never managed to shoot one. But as a kid, I was fascinated with trapping, and I remember I snared one snowshoe hare in my backyard, and we ate it. It was the only thing I really ever managed to trap as a kid, goofing around. I got a snowshoe hare, and I have a picture of me in full dork mode, about 15 years old, with my Coke bottle glasses, holding my snowshoe hare that I got. My mom was a good sport; she cooked it up, but. For like upland game, if you want to call it that, the main thing we have is ptarmigan. They're like related to grouse.
Okay.
They're willow ptarmigan. So they look basically like a grouse. They're the size of a grouse. They have a little stubby beak and everything. But the cool thing about them is they turn snow white in the winter, and then they turn brown in the summer. They change color every season. And in between, they'll be mottled. You can look up pictures. They'll be half pure white, and then they'll have splotched in there, this just brown like a grouse. And so it's pretty cool. You go in the middle of winter. You go out on the tundra or wherever, riding a 4-wheeler, snowmobile, going for a walk, and you don't see them. They just look like a little snowball with little tiny black beady eyes and a little black beak. And when they fly and their tail feathers fan out, they have a band of black along their tail feathers. But when they land and their tail tucks back in together, they're just like a little white lump in the snow. So they're hard to spot. So the best way to hunt them is if you have a snowmobile, just go cruise around like the edges of clumps of alders and stuff, brush. And when you get to a flock of them, they'll fly, but kind of like grouse, they fly a short distance and then they land again. And it's so wide open that you can just watch where they land and go over there and shoot a couple of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so sometimes they'll get in really big flocks. And the only time I really remember seeing one of the really big flocks was out at one of the hills in our town, out behind the school on the tundra there, where we would go snowboarding. I was out there with my friends, and we had tow ropes behind the 4-wheelers, pulling each other around, and we'd go up the hill and snowboard down it. And we went out there one day, and we saw some ptarmigan, and then we went over a little bit, and I realized like they're everywhere. There's like just every direction you look, by every bush, there's dozens and dozens of ptarmigan around. And so my one buddy who lived the closest, it was the same guy I went moose hunting with on 9/11. He was the one who got me into snowboarding. He lived pretty nearby, and he zipped home, grabbed a shotgun, came back, and shot 1 or 2 ptarmigan. And I thought, only in Alaska can you go out snowboarding and come home having shot your lunch. But usually you'd find a handful of them here and there. A couple or maybe a flock of 8 or 10 or something like that. Yeah, I used to go out for just a hike on the tundra, take one of my guns, and you never know what you're going to find. If you see a wolf, you can shoot that. If you see a ptarmigan, you can shoot that. If you see a rabbit, whatever, it was fun. It was a sense of adventure.
Mm-hmm.
I remember first long gun I ever bought was a Winchester 94 Trapper in 45 Colt, and it was right after I started hand loading my own ammo. And so I got my gun. I hadn't even sighted it in yet. I had just bought it. I hadn't even taken it to the range and gotten the sights adjusted, but I loaded up some ammo, and I thought I'm going to go out for a walk on the tundra with my new gun. And so I loaded it up and I went out for a hike on the tundra, and there was a little hill maybe a mile out on the tundra behind my house. And when I wanted to go for a hike, I'd just wander out to that, and you could get kind of a cool view from there. And so I walked up this hill, and there was just a couple little clumps of brush on the top of it, just a couple little alder bushes. It was pretty barren, but I got up there and I looked around. I enjoyed the view for a few minutes, and then I was ready to head back home. And I turned around and I looked over by the little bush on top of this hill off to one side, and there were a couple of ptarmigan over there. I'm like, oh my goodness, I didn't even notice them. They didn't fly away. They didn't flush. Here they are, 50 feet away from me as I'm standing there. And I thought, well, right now their town is right behind, they're between me and the direction back home where houses are. So I walked around them a little bit, so I was facing away from where home was and the houses. And I lay down. I thought, well, I'm going to hope my sights are pretty close on right out of the box with this thing. I lay down. I shot one, and the rest took off and flew a short distance and landed. So I went over, I got the one I shot, and I walked over to where the others landed. I shot one more, and I came home with 2 grouse. The first time I took my gun, I thought, that was sweet.
Nice.
Yeah. I was on that same area with my buddy one time, and we're walking along, and there's a little, kind of a swampy little creek that runs through the tundra there. And over near that on the snow, we saw, it just looked like a little round clump of snow. And as we were walking, my buddy looked and he said, is that a ptarmigan? I said, I don't know. I mean, it's the right size, but it's not moving. It's not walking around. I don't see a head sticking up or anything. But it just kind of looked like it's just sitting all by itself. So we got closer and closer. And finally, we both thought, that really looks like a ptarmigan, but it's not moving. It's just, is it dead? I don't know. But finally, we got close enough where we're like, okay, we're confident that's a ptarmigan that's like asleep in the middle of the day, I guess. So I'll shoot it. So I shoot this thing. I walk over there and we're like, yeah, it's a ptarmigan, but for whatever reason, middle of the day, it was just like, I'm just going to take a nap in the middle of the wide open.
Wow.
No idea what, but this is what we do for fun in Alaska as teenagers,
That's awesome. It
Go make your own fun,
Yeah, it's kind of like I didn't grow up as remote, but yeah, you have to find your own way of finding fun, especially because you don't have money. So yeah, I mean, go out play with the animals and whatnot. But there was a lot of farming. It was a farm town where I grew up at, so go help out farmers and things like that. But nothing. I mean, the most that people used to kill lizards. And I never got into it. People used to grab a stone and,
sure,
try to smash them and whatnot. I was like, okay, I just never. Snakes, people got into, like, if you found a snake, you grab it, and then people ate them. It was like, yeah, it tastes like chicken. It's
sure.
Like, yeah. But, yeah, I didn't grow up around that, and it wasn't until lately that I've been more around hunters that I learned more about it and started, like, the interest picked up and whatnot. And all of a sudden I'm just like, yeah, I find it amazing, like all these stories of people growing up like that, or even a guy that we know in common who went to Africa and has shot, what do you call it, zebras and some other bigger animals. I'm just like, man, that's just impressive to me.
Well, it's funny how different hunting is around the world in different areas. Like growing up in Alaska and having that as my kind of my mental framework of how hunting works and what hunting is like, and then coming to Minnesota, I thought, well, deer hunting really didn't interest me, because I thought, down here you're sitting in somebody's yard, in a tree. You're up there and there's a barn over there and a cornfield there, and somebody's house is a half mile that way, and I'm hunting, and it was kind of anticlimactic to me, coming from Alaska. I was like, hey, I grew up in like the wilderness, and miles of just wide open tundra, and you're all by yourself and you're doing your own thing. And so I thought, I don't want to just sit in a tree on somebody's yard, basically, and then wait for something to wander by. People don't tree stand hunt in Alaska. You go out and you find the animals. And so I had a friend then who, a few years after I moved here, he said, well, hey, we hunt way up in northern Minnesota where there's just wide open woods and miles of open space, and it's way up by Canada. and it's way different. You can go down and stalk the animals if you want, that kind of thing. I thought, okay, well, that sounds a little more fun, if you can go take a 4-wheeler like I did when I was a kid, and go way out in the woods and go wherever you want. And so that got me into deer hunting. And then took a very short amount of time. Once I started doing that and I got a taste for it, then I got all into deer hunting. And now I literally sit in my grandparents' yard. Right there, you can look through the trees and see the roof of the garage, but now I've got the bug and I'm stuck in Minnesota, so I might as well make the most of it. I'm a deer hunter now. So
I met a guy who opened up a restaurant here. You ever had pho?
One time.
Okay, so this guy opened up the best pho place I ever had. I think he was from Green Bay. So his restaurant, he made it around the theme of hunting.
Okay.
And so when you walked in, he had all his trophies hung up on the wall. So he had
Nice.
fish that he caught, like some big fish, and then he had I don't remember if he had a bear hung up on there, but I know he had pictures of himself bear hunting.
Okay.
Out in like Montana. This guy traveled all around the U.S. as well doing that, and it was just phenomenal that you go into this, what do you call it, Vietnamese food place, and the theme is like hunting, and it's like a cabin. It was such a warm place, but the food was just phenomenal.
Nice.
Too bad the guy moved.
Well, you ever heard of Timothy Treadwell?
Mm-mm.
I think I'm getting the name right. He was a guy back in, I don't remember what year, 90s maybe. He was obsessed with bears for whatever reason, brown bears. And went up to Alaska and took multiple trips. And he would go out and live in these areas where there was bears, and he'd live like among them, and kind of the whole, Jane Goodall and the apes type thing. Well, he wanted to live with bears and study them and do all this stuff. And I guess he was, kind of had the reputation of being a little crazy. Remember this guy?
It rings a bell. Yeah.
Well, he went down in history because eventually he got killed and partially eaten by a bear, him and his girlfriend. And they filmed it. They had a camera going and it recorded.
I remember
them
the
being
story
eaten.
now. Yep.
Well, that, as the crow flies, I guess, wasn't terribly far from where I grew up. And so, of course, once you're in a plane, you're flying, so distance becomes kind of a relative thing. But anyway, the group of people that went to investigate that and wound up killing the bear that had killed him and his girlfriend was the main guy who was the cop in our town. We had like one main law enforcement guy year round, and then in the summer when there was extra, they needed extra people, they'd bring in other guys. But there was kind of like one main go-to guy who was the law in our town, the cop. And for whatever reason, he was one of the handful of guys that flew out there to investigate this and wound up killing the bear in question. And so I remember one time, I don't remember why, but I was over. I was in his office for a couple minutes, and I remember he had a framed photo of him out bear hunting with his .44 Magnum, a big dead brown bear, and he had shot it with his .44. So, it was kind of cool.
That's crazy. Yeah, I remember that story of that couple, and then they found the tape, and
Yep.
yeah,
You can. I think it might be on YouTube still. You can look it up and listen to it. It's audio, but
yeah.
it's pretty crazy. I know after I left, it seemed like there was a little spate of bear shootings in our town. I don't remember that being much of a thing when I was there, but in just the year or two after I left, the guy that my dad worked for, he tried raising chickens one year. And it's hard to raise chickens because predators, specifically bears, they're just like, hey, free meals, sweet. Forget the dumpster. I'm going to finish off these,
Mm-hmm.
And so it's hard to keep them alive. And this guy had it right on the edge of his yard, and a bear came out of the woods, busted into his chicken coop. As I remember hearing the story, he went in the house, got his rifle. He was like with a customer. His business was right next to his house. He goes in, gets a rifle, comes out, shoots the bear that has a chicken in its mouth.
Wow.
So there was that. And then another basically neighbor, person that lived nearby, had a bear getting too aggressive and curious, trying to break in their door, and shot a bear. And then I also heard that there was a moose that had come in near town. Usually where we were way out on the coast, that we didn't see moose around there. They were a little further inland. You had to go a few miles further inland where there were actual like forest, and you could find moose in there. But apparently there was a moose that was near our town, which was kind of unusual. Walking around, people would see it. And it had a calf, and a bear came along, and I don't know if it killed the mother or the calf or both, but it at least killed like the calf and possibly the mother too, and it attacked it while it was giving birth, I guess was how it worked. So anyway, they went and shot that bear too. So yeah, there was a lot of bear activity right after I left.
It's insane. I read an article, must have been the beginning of this year, where I think it was somewhere in Europe, might have been Sweden or Switzerland, but they found out that bears, just like any other animal and just like humans, they have their own personality. And they found that there are bears that are capable of being serial killers. Yeah, it was in the title of the article was something like oh, bears are capable of having a serial killer personalities.
Sure.
And so they found out that basically most bears hibernate in the winter.
Right.
Well, there were some that were actually they would wake up in the middle of winter, and then they would just go on a killing spree, just killing whatever they could find. Sometimes not even eating the animals.
Yeah.
And then they would just like, oh, okay, I'm done. Like, I'm not thirsty for blood anymore, so I'm going back to bed. Yep. And that what you're saying of like the one that killed the moose and the calf, it just kind of popped that in my mind of like, oh, I wonder if there's a possibility that could have been a personality thing.
Yeah, well, it's instinct, Different instinct kicks in different ways for different creatures, just like it does for people.
Yeah, that's crazy, man.
Yep.
Yeah, and then with bears too, I know in Minnesota, I think we've had a couple people being killed by black bears, which are not as aggressive as brown bears.
Yeah.
And I don't remember exactly how many people it was, but I saw that the majority of bear attacks that happen here, especially with like black bears here, is related to people walking their dogs. So if you're walking your dog and all of a sudden a bear pops up, bear's probably thinking, oh, human and wolf or something like that, and maybe they just freak out and they start, especially if they have cops with them.
Okay.
Then they're definitely gonna go on a defensive mode. And I don't know, it's just something interesting that when I go camping in the winter or in the spring, I try to be as careful as possible bringing the dogs. Yeah. Because I think that's something people should keep in mind.
Yep. Well, we had a grouse hunter here in Minnesota some years back who was out grouse hunting with a dog, and somehow or other his dog was out working through the brush and came running back to him with a wolf chasing it, and the guy blasted the wolf with his grouse gun just a few feet away as his dog ran back to him. Wolf came running right in, and he just blasted it with a load of birdshot and killed it at like very close range. Yeah.
That's the thing that I guess if you're out in the woods, people should be probably carrying something for self-defense. I mean, at very, very minimum, maybe bear spray, because they'll take care of wolves too. Yeah. But then if you have a dog and you spray your dog with that, it might take off, or it's just. But yeah, people should be careful when they're out in the woods, whether they're camping or doing whatever activities.
Yep. Yeah, it's interesting in Alaska trying to go fishing or camping or whatever when it's bear season.
Whatever you want to do, is like.
Yeah, I remember my brother one year really wanted to camp out in the backyard, and my dad was out of town on business for some reason, so it was just my mom, me, and my brother. And a friend of ours was going to camp with him, and apparently I was too little. I wasn't allowed to camp in the backyard. I was probably about 10, something like that. My brother's 4 years older, so my mom wasn't going to let him because it was like bear season, what they call, like late summer when they're done eating the salmon and now they're around town more and wandering through looking for garbage to eat or what have you. And so she wasn't going to let him. Finally, he said, all right, what if we put the tent like right outside the back door? Like right there by the fire pit in the backyard. Finally, she relented. She said, all right. She said, take your dad's 44 with you. He had a revolver, a single action 44 Magnum. And she said, take that with you just in case, and take the dog. We had a chocolate lab with us. So she thought the dog will let you know if there's any bears around, she'll start barking. And so I was stuck inside and wasn't too happy about that, but whatever. And a little bit later, we hear the dog barking. And So we go over to the door, we hear some commotion, we open it up, and my brother and the friend come running in the back door, and my brother's holding the 44 Magnum up like this, all excited. And they get inside, and he turns around, and the dog's name was Piper, and he starts yelling for the dog, and the dog made a beeline in, and they said what happened was they were in the tent, and the dog hopped up and got on attention and kind of started growling a little bit. They thought, uh-oh. And so they unzipped, and they looked across the yard, and they saw the dark outline of a bear wandering through the yard. Well, the dog took off very heroically to chase and scare the bear away. And bears don't want anything to do with a yippy dog. They'll run off. And but they said that the dog had the sense that as soon as they were safe in the house and they called for her, she came running and left the bear alone. But yeah, we had times. I remember we have somewhere I had a picture of our barbecue grill from the backyard with a big muddy bear paw print on it. Bear came through, and grills, they catch grease and they smell like meat, and things cooking. So the bear was curious about it, or maybe he was trying to lick some grease off it or something. And in the process of knocking it over and fumbling around with it, it left a big muddy bear print right on the top of it. Yeah.
Wow. That's
I remember seeing the top of one go by my bedroom window one time. We had one in the yard going around the building, and it was going around by my bedroom, and I ran in there, and I have this picture in my mind of seeing like the top of it go by walking through the yard. Yeah.
Man.
It's crazy.
That's impressive.
Yep.
A way different way of living. I can only imagine. I mean, even going up in a cabin here with other people and staying up in the cabin, it's like you see nature, but just being out there, I can only imagine how different it would be with bears and all these other animals. Man. So, Minnesota, you're into deer hunting here. Mm-hmm. Is it mainly whitetail? Is that what we have, or what else do we have here?
For big game?
Yeah, we have. I know we have moose now, population, but it's a lottery, right? It's a lottery tag that you have to get.
I believe they closed that. I don't think that's been reopened yet.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the population took a big dip some time back, and I think when I moved here, they still had the lottery where it was once in a lifetime. You could draw one tag, and that was it. And then they didn't really know why, but the population just started to really plummet, and partly wolves, and they didn't know if it was disease or what. But here, cookie. So yeah, the moose hunting hasn't been open in I think quite some time, but yeah.
I know they were reintroduced right in the northeastern part of the state, and then they started kind of eating the resources that deer were getting up there, and eventually they were kind of driving the population of deer down. Yeah, as the moose has been increasing.
Well, I used to deer hunt up north every fall, and then the area where we were it just became so pitiful for deer hunting that we finally had to just find other places, because I mean you could look at the harvest numbers and it was just some of the worst hunting, lowest population numbers anywhere in the state. Yeah. But the wolves just went insane up there. You'd be out, walking to your stand, and you'd have fresh wolf tracks right in the trail as you're walking out. And I remember one morning going out and the little gravel pit where we park, we had gotten a fresh dusting of snow overnight, and as I'm riding out on my four-wheeler, I looked down on the fresh little blanket of snow, and there was good sized set of deer tracks running through the gravel pit and a set of wolf tracks following it. So it was very plain to see. It was fresh snow. So you just there's the deer and there's the wolf. Wow. Yeah. So it's been a really, really rough, the past 5 to 10 years up there.
Yeah. And lately we've had some really cold winters up there. So I remember, I think it was you who told me that you have 3 or 4 days of like really, really bad cold, and all of a sudden it's like these animals are just gonna die. Yeah. So then that drives the population down too.
Yeah, you get the cold snap in the winter where you get that 1 week where the nights up there are 30 below or what have you, and you get several of those consecutive, and the deer can only bounce back from so much. I mean, you have to have calories to burn, and they can't get enough with it that cold.
That cold, and yeah. I mean, what do they eat in the wintertime? Just with all the snow?
Well, they browse off the trees, and then they have to, whatever, if they can dig through the snow and find anything. But I remember one of the last deer I shot up there, kind of the last decent one as far as bucks go, it was a bitter cold day, and I think it was a little below zero when we woke up in the morning, and we headed out, and I shot this deer that was over there browsing on some trees with a doe. And when I got to him, I saw the top of his head, the fur was all matted with like ice crystal clumps, like you'd get on your fleece bibs, you know. And because when you walk through those trees, the snow drops on you, and then whatever kind of heat comes out through your fur melts. And yeah, it looked like dinosaur scales basically on the top of his head. I thought, I did you a favor, you poor animal. Wow. Here you've got like ice chunks on the top of your head. That was a crazy hunt. It was cold and a lot of snow, but yeah, it's a rough life up there between the wolves and the cold. Mm-hmm. Deer don't live very long. So,
is that some of the spots that's been like the toughest to hunt for you in terms of like climate and getting to spots and traveling and all those things?
As what? Northern Minnesota?
Yeah.
It's rough. I mean, that day I was just talking about, I remember, normally it's preferable to have a four-wheeler to get to where you need to get to. And we cover a decent bit of ground to get out to where we hunt. And on that particular day, all of the machines were out of service. We had two brand new Hondas that wouldn't start. We had another nice machine that wouldn't start. And then we had another one that fired up fine, but it was frozen solid. The whole drive mechanism in the back, the rear wheels had gotten wet and then frozen overnight and were so solid that it wouldn't move. Oh. You'd put it in gear and give it gas and it wouldn't move. And so we had to park it in a heated garage and let it melt. And so on that day we actually had to walk out through the snow. We had to cross a creek without getting our feet wet. Find a log over. Everything was just blanketed in a lot of snow. We had to cross the creek and then hike cross country through the deep powder to get out to where the stand finally was. It was like, I think it was about 11 a.m. by the time I finally got to my stand. Normally you try to get an early start. Mm-hmm. And here it was like almost lunch by the time we got done messing with the four-wheelers and then walked through all this deep, deep powder to get all the way out to where our hunting spot was. Half the day was gone. And then it turned out 45 minutes later, I looked over my shoulder and there was a deer head peeking out through the trees in the woods. So.
Nice.
I never thought I'd get a deer that day. I thought, what is the point? And then boom, like within an hour of getting to my stand on this bitter cold day, I got a deer. So
I would like to get into the topic of what your invention 300 Blackout Solo, 300 Solo, which is a upper receiver that goes onto an AR platform. I would really like to leave that for another episode if you like to come back. I really, really enjoy this. We can talk about it now if you want to, or we can leave it for the next episode.
I'm fine with whatever.
Because the firearms alone, talking about it, I feel that it's a very interesting topic, and I think we can go easily another hour just talking about the Solo and just firearms in general. All the crazy stuff out there.
Sounds good.
Your social media? Would you like to share your social media? What do you have out there?
For the business?
Yeah.
Oh, it's all through Solo 300. If you go on Instagram, type in Solo 300. Go on Facebook. The website is solo300.com. That's mainly just the store where we sell them. It's all out there.
Yeah. So if you guys want to support Elijah, he's got and you want to check out what the 300 Solo is, and be ready for next episode. Go on, what's the 300 Solo? So 300 SOLO.com.
Solo 300.
Oh,
not 300 Solo.
So SOLO 300.com.
Yep.
And then if you go on Instagram.
Both.
And both. You should be able to find it, Solo 300. And you can learn about it. And I don't know what else. Is there anything else that you would like to share?
Not tonight.
Not tonight.
That's a topic for another day.
Yeah. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. I really enjoyed learning a lot from Elijah and Alaska, and just very interesting topics that you bring to the table. Yep. So yeah, we'll do it next time.
All right. We'll see you then.